The year is 1997. You've just been promoted to the executive group of the company car list. But what do you choose? On one hand, of course, you could go for something traditional, a BMW 3 or 5 Series, maybe an Audi A6 or an A4, maybe, if you're really pushing it, a Mercedes C-Class. But maybe you're not that traditional. You could go French, Citroën XM perhaps. That's very non-traditional, or is that a bit too outlandish for you? But of course, what you could go for is you could make the choice to go for something Swedish, something reliable, something dependable. And that, dear viewer, is where the Saab 9000 comes in. Welcome to another Seized Gearbox video, and today we're going to tell the story of my 1997 Saab 9000. So this is my 1997 Saab 9000. I've owned this car now for, I think, just nearly 8 years, would you believe, which is the longest I've ever owned a car. It's also the car I've done the most mileage in, and I think I've done about 60,000 miles in this car. And it just tells you a lot. I do really love this car, and I'm going to tell you a little bit today as to why. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the car, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey with this particular Saab 9000. So let's dive in. So the Saab 9000 was first introduced in the year 1984. Saab were a one-car brand at that point. They just had the 900, which whilst it was doing well, they realised they wanted to diversify. But to diversify also needed to be cost-effective. So Saab joined forces with Fiat, Alfa Romeo and Lancia, all of course part of the Fiat group, on what was called the Type 4 platform. And the Type 4 platform evolved into three cars other than this: the Fiat Chroma, the Lancia Thema and the Alfa Romeo 164. But of course the non-Fiat group brother was this one, the Saab 9000. Initially they were designed to have many interchangeable parts between them, but Saab liked to do things their own way, as GM would find out some years later when they developed the 93, and they liked to fit their own safety features. For example, the doors were supposed to all be the same shape, but Saab decided to add extra reinforcement to their doors to make sure that they were better at crash protection. The Fiat group didn't really sell in America, whereas Saab did, and that had to be a consideration, hence the bigger bumpers of the 9000 compared to the others. But what ended up happening was, of course, that there were not the interchangeable parts that the Fiat group had designed and intended for, and there were in fact only 7 parts which were interchangeable between the models by the time the models came out. So the 9000 had already been through 2 iterations by the time we reached the 9000 CSE, which we have here in its kind of run-out form from the late 1990s. The initial 9000s had a slightly flatter front, wider rear lights, and this was kind of rounded out a little bit in the early 1990s. I have to say, my opinion, I do like the later models. I think they've got that a real sort of sophistication and elegance about them. This particular one, mine, is in Cayenne Red. It was quite a rare colour. There are not many Cayenne Red ones left. You find a lot in quite darker colours. I have to admit, I think I'd really like a purple one, though. They did do a few of those. So this particular one comes with the 2-litre low-pressure turbo engine. You could get them in all sorts of different engine flavours, but most of them were turbocharged, although not all. This particular engine, the 2-litre, is the B204 engine of much fame. And believe you me, I have been asked more than one time if I'd like to sell the engine to fit inside a Vauxhall Corsa or some such. But the answer is always no. It belongs very squarely in my Saab 9000. The 9000 was, of course, by 1997 succeeded by the 95, and the 95, a very different kettle of fish altogether. One of my favourite features of this car when I originally bought it was the fact that it had headlight wipers, one of those uniquely Swedish features that really goes down well. In total, they built around 503,000 Saab 9000s across the world, selling them all over in Europe as well as Scandinavia, but even in North America as well, where they sold relatively well. There were, of those 500,000 odd, there were 175,000-ish CSE models like this one, the hatchbacks, because of course it wasn't just a hatchback, you could get a saloon model as well. Within the model lineup, you had your base models of the 2-litre non-turbo, there was a 2-litre low-pressure turbo, a 2.3-litre low-pressure turbo, and then of course the 2.3 high-pressure turbos, which you found in the sportier models such as the Aero. This one, being a very much of a lower spec model, is only 150 brake horsepower, but to be honest, that's plenty. Never felt the need for any more. In terms of Saab 9000s in the UK today, there are around 520 registered as on the road, according to the website How Many Left, as of today in 2025, and there are actually around 1,600 on Sawn. This one very much on the road and very much used. I've done about 60,000 miles in it, and we are currently sitting just over 220,000 miles on this particular car. So the Saab 9000's interior is really a lovely place to be, a lovely comfortable driving position. A lovely comfortable driving position with its lovely wood panelled dash there. Of course it is fake plastic wood, but we won't mention that. And of course Saab's famous comfortable seats. These truly are some of the most comfortable car seats that I have ever sat in. My backside has graced that seat for a lot of miles. Around the car you've also got a lovely roomy back seat as well. You can definitely fit 3 people across the back there. Don't be fooled by the toolbox in the back, it's not unreliable. I just like to be prepared. And of course, one of the great things of a 9000, a very, very spacious boot. Okay, you could fit definitely a few bodies inside of there. So how about on the road then? How does the 9000 compare? Well, I think as you'd expect from any 1990s executive car, it's softly sprung and very smooth. I think one of the things I dislike the most about modern cars is just how fidgety they are on the road. And despite the fact that my phone mount is wobbling a little bit, it is actually a very, very smooth and softly sprung driving experience. These seats are just so utterly comfortable that you could genuinely sit in them for hours and be entirely comfortable. In fact, I have done many times. So the power delivery on a 9000 is always quite smooth. There's very little in the way, I find, and certainly in the low pressure turbo, very little in the way of turbo lag, and you can deliver that power very, very smoothly for any overtaking manoeuvres. But to be quite honest, this 9000 just likes to be hustled along at a fairly unhurried and smooth pace. That's certainly what I have found down the years of owning this one. Will it go round corners? Yeah, of course it'll go round corners and you can chuck it in a little bit, but it isn't designed for that. It's designed for doing exactly what I'm doing now, which is barreling up a dual carriageway, maybe on my way to a high-powered sales meeting, maybe with my large mobile phone in my hand, because it's the 1990s and I can drive with a mobile phone in my hand then because danger doesn't exist. And I'm there phoning through sales order on my giant Motorola as I cruise down a nice motorway, which will be nice and quiet and full of lowly Vauxhall Cavaliers and, I don't know, Citroen BXs, as opposed to today where I've just been overtaken by a Suzuki Swift. So how did I come to end up with a 9000 then? So I've had this car for nearly 8 years, and this car was actually only ever meant to stay with me for 6 months as a little bit of a stopgap. I'd had a nice BMW on a nice bit of finance because, you know, as a young and upcoming person, that was what I thought I needed to do, was to buy myself a nice brand new BMW, and I'd done that bit, and I knew that I needed a car to tide me over for a few months as I raised the deposit to buy my next brand new car. And the fact was, I'd always fancied a Saab. I'd actually always been attracted to the brand as a whole because they were just that little bit offbeat, that little bit quirky. But me and the 9000 had quite a bit of a history. The 9000 was new in the 1990s when I was probably an impressionable youngster going across to secondary school, and that 9000 always looked like a nice, solid and safe, dependable, but also a little bit different car. You just didn't see all that many of them. And then when I hit the higher years in school, my form tutor got a Saab 9000, and I remember as part of my formative car years thinking, you know, I thought a lot of my form tutor in school and thinking, that's a car I'd like to own. Later in life, I was friendly as I was about kind of 17 or 18. I was friendly with a fella who bought himself a 9000 Aero as his car. You know, that was his car that he'd always fancied. And some of my formative car years then were spent with him in this Aero, thinking that actually, do you know what? Yes, a 9000 is a car that I would really like to own. So when I needed a car for a stopgap, I was looking around at some 1990s executive cars because that was the kind of favoured car type that I wanted. And this one popped up just a few miles away from a specialist, from a Saab specialist who had this car. And actually, as it turns out, when I went to view it, the Saab specialist had in fact had this car twice. He'd sold it originally a few years previously and then had taken it back in part exchange against a 9.5 some years later. What he'd then done was thought that this car might be a useful use of spares for 9000s, because actually 9000s weren't particularly popular at that point. So he'd parked it in his field ready to be a spares car. 5 years later, he whacked a battery on it and it started first time, and he drove it out of the field ready to strip for spares, only to discover that despite having covered over 160,000 miles at that point, it was probably still a pretty good, dependable car that could be recommissioned. Threw it in for an MOT, did a little bit of recommissioning work, and then decided to sell it. And he sold it to me for £600. £600, a car that was going to stopgap me for 6 months. And yet here we are, 8 years later, and I still use it regularly, love it much, and find it to be a great car to have. I recently got put back into everyday service when my Saab 9.3, which I normally use every day, had to come off the road for a little bit. This came back into my kind of 50-mile round trip a day commute and did so admirably. It is very, very usable. But then I can also take it to a car show and it always gets a lot of attention. A lot of people say, I used to have a 9000, or, you know, those 9000s, aren't they good cars? So a really, really nice car to have, both for the commute and for the show. And that kind of goes to sum up why I love the 9000 quite as much as I do. It is a car that can be everything. It is one of the best all-round cars that I have ever owned. It does everything. It will swallow the family and put all their luggage, and we can go for a week away in this car. But at the same time, I can turn it to a classic car show as long as I've polished it a little bit, and it will certainly not show itself up. Now, I was a little bit clever as I did the filming. I didn't show you some of the worst bits. Yes, there's a big scuff up the back, there's a bit of rust on the front corner, but this car I think will be hopefully with us for many, many years to come. Well, we'll find out very soon, because the MOT runs out in 2 weeks, and we'll see what my tester has to say about it. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this latest CSE Gearbox video. If you're still with me, then you must also like the Saab 9000 just like me, and I hope you've enjoyed my little talk through why I love this car quite. Well, folks, that's it. That is the video. I do hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about my 1997 Saab 9000 and a little bit more about Saab 9000s in general. And here as we sing with all the lovely daffodils and spring is springing, it's time to say I hope you enjoyed it. Please watch some more CSE Gearbox videos. Make sure that you do subscribe to the channel and like our videos. We look forward to seeing your comments below. See you again.